Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the conference room for our second session of the day and fourth panel of the conference, focusing on African civil society and strengthening ceasefires. Please join me in welcoming to the stage the chair of the panel, Kidane Kiros, Senior Fellow at the Policy Center for the New South. And now, please welcome to the stage the speakers for this session. Mohamed Jeghllaly, Mediation Advisor at the HD Center. Judith van den Boogert, Mediator and Dialogue Facilitator in Social and Conflict Transformation at The Independent. Oumar Ba, Associate Expert at Les Afriques dans le monde. And Saïd Abass Ahamed, Director at Thinking Africa. Before giving the floor to the chair for this session, we will view a short introductory video for the panel.
This panel will explore the crucial role of African civil society in ceasefire processes, focusing on its proactive role in peace building and conflict resolution. Participants will discuss the value of inclusive peace processes at different stages of ceasefire negotiations and implementation. What formal means can boost the participation of political parties, NGOs, women, and young people in ceasefire and peace negotiation processes.
Kidane Kiros, the floor is yours.
The session is on African civil society. Basically, we'll be focusing on Africa and African civil society and strengthening ceasefires, or maybe in general peace process or negotiation process. So at international level, there is an accepted wisdom, especially when it comes the very important vital role that is played by civil society organizations, especially in post-conflict societies or in post-conflict resolution. But the issue is that when it comes to the actual involvement, the actual participation of various civil society organizations or civil society groups, they are not part and parcel of the actual process of negotiation, because largely, if we look at the processes, negotiation process, be it in Africa or beyond Africa, they are elite-driven, so most of the time, it's only the actors that are involved. When I say actors, the immediate actors of the conflict, it can be state actors or armed non-state actors. So the issue is that, if civil society organizations are not involved in the actual negotiation of ceasefires or peace accords, then most probably this will negatively impact the sustainability. That is the sustainability of peace agreements or ceasefires, and of course, not only the sustainability, but the post-conflict peace-building process as well. So, as you can see from the title of the session, today we'll be discussing what should be, the role of these civil society organizations in Africa in the actual process of ceasefire negotiation, and then what will be their role, especially when it comes to the effectiveness and sustainability of negotiation processes. When I say negotiation, I'm referring to ceasefire negotiation process. So in order to address these issues, I have well-known experts in the area who would be sharing with us their experience. So first, I will raise one general question, which will be addressed by 4 of the speakers. They will have maximum of 4 minutes each. Then after, there will be also specific questions that will be forwarded to each of the speakers. So the first question, well, actually, I'm not going to introduce the speakers because it's already on the app for the event, so you can read it or you can have the information about the speakers. So in the best interest of time, I will be directly going to mention or to raise the first question, which I am expecting to be addressed by 4 of the speakers. So the first question is that how does this active participation or involvement, we can say, of the African civil societies, organizations or groups enhance the effectiveness and the sustainability of ceasefire agreements in general? So maybe I can start from Mr. Saïd Abass. Then after, we'll follow the sitting arrangement. Thank you.
Bonjour et merci beaucoup.
Good morning, and thank you very much to the Policy Center for the invitation, and thank you to the session chair for setting the stage. Participation of civil society in African mediation is a very long-standing issue and also very regular, because generally those that are in power do not want for civil society to come and meddle and look into what is going on. So we needed to wait for the Resolution 1325, which promotes and fosters the women's participation, that really strive to open up the debate and give greater space to civil society to take part in these negotiations. It is very important to have civil society involved, but at which time? Because timing is of the essence, because sometimes it is important to reduce the number of participants to achieve tangible results, and at other times it is important to open up the conversation, to broaden the conversation, to have greater legitimacy and reach that peace agreement. Allow me to give you an example of the civil war in Liberia. We all know that Madame Magboe, which later on received the Nobel Peace Prize, did a great job by bringing together women ministers, Muslim women from different faiths from Liberia, because Jacques Delors said that I am the devil and I will chase you all the way to your restroom. And Madame Magboe said that, well, since it's a devil, I would like to call all the women from Liberia to come and make a prayer for the devil to go back to hell. And so there's a film that's called Pray for the Devil to Go Back to Hell, following this initiative. And she managed to mobilize civil society in Liberia and raise funds to go to Ghana, and also have to exert a pressure on the ceasefire agreement, and in fact to ensure that the war steps out of the space of violence to embark on the political space with a negotiation process, with a dialogue, which resulted in the fact that Liberia withdrew from the war process and embarked on a long peace process. And I'd like to give you another example that I experienced myself last year. So I am originally from the Comores, and we had the chairmanship of the African Union. The president of the Comores asked me to go to Sudan to try to resolve the situation on the ground and contribute to resolving the situation on the ground. So I went to Sudan and met the General Abraham, and we met all of the actors from the Sudanese civil society organizations for Sudan, and then in Cairo, and then in Addis Ababa, in Doha, and a few in Paris. And the strategy that we had set with our president and the African Union is that since both actors no longer wish to embark in negotiations or have not managed to reach an agreement, let's try to rally civil society to try to have an alternative to political dialogue and the possibility to exert pressure on the parties. And this is where we see the limits of civil society and the external influences that are very strong, and we won't name names, resulted in the fact that this initiative failed because everyone called their sponsor, their friend, they said, don't go, this is pointless. So, in the case of Sudan, despite the fact that we invested all of the Comorian public money in this, for this, and we did not manage to organize a single meeting because as soon as we scheduled dates, be it in Cairo or Addis Ababa or even Dubai, well, other more powerful forces than ourselves exerted such a pressure on the actors, and hence, unfortunately, not a single credible meeting was held. There were some small meetings that were held in Addis, in Cairo, but in order to have a real meeting that could trigger a new momentum, a strong momentum, well, I must say that this was extremely challenging to pull off. So both of these examples that I've just mentioned perfectly bear witness to the fact that we do need civil society. It needs to be properly organized, it needs to be, has the right resources, and the timing needs to be right to have the desired impact on the process. And as it's been mentioned here yesterday, we need greater participation of women, youth, and all parties involved. Now, at which time can the ceasefire agreement, well, it is a very technical and complex process. At that point in time, do we need everyone? Well, maybe to exert pressure on the actors that might be necessary, but once this pressure is exerted, well, there needs to take a step back and engage in the technical part of the work, to discuss the duration, the geographic space of the ceasefire, etc. So it's extremely important for us to push the door open, involve civil society, and I would like to conclude on a recommendation. It was mentioned yesterday that the Kingdom of Morocco has made commensurate efforts in the years spanning between 2000 to 2010 to train imams to bring forth a counter discourse to jihadist rhetoric. And in civil society, it might also be interesting.
Okay, thank you so much. Next, Mr. Oumar Ba. Maximum 4 minutes. I will stop you if you... I'm so sorry. Just...
Merci bien. Vous allez me permettre d'abord.
Please, thank you very much. I would like to first and foremost thank the team from the Policy Center from the New South, as well as my fellow panelists, and all of the participants, all protocols observed, and the Kingdom of Morocco that is gracing us with their wonderful hospitality. So I will continue on the same lines as my dear colleague here. I'd like to mention 2 fundamental points. We first need to challenge the notion of what is civil society and what sits aside from a political party or a coalition of parties or political collective. And I think that from that standpoint, the notion of civil, quote unquote, takes a whole other meaning. And so it will allow us to reconcile what we would like to set out as a purpose for civil society and figure out what we need in the technical and scientific toolbox of civil society. Now, for the political parties aim to preserve political power, which is not the case of these organizations of civil society. So this is the first main difference between political parties and civil societies. Well, they do also have some similarities because civil society organizations are governed by the law as well, and so political organizations their main purpose is to engage in politics. So we need to place the cursor and understand what civil society's role. It's a mosaic of social structures composed of men and women that pursue shared objectives, but that are not on the quest for power, but at the same time also contribute to setting political agendas. And so the second core issue that brings us together today, and so what is their involvement in these peace processes? I'll give you three brief examples. First, Mali and the Ouaga agreements that failed, the Algier agreement, which today have expired since January 25th, 2024, which means that civil society, even if it was consulted, it contributed, it was inclusive to a certain extent. However, on its own, it cannot make much progress. The second case, which is also commendable, but is challenging, is Sudan. In May 2023, there was a ceasefire agreement that lasted a week. That means that they pulled teeth to obtain this ceasefire agreement, but it's a sort of midway between the ceasefire and the peace agreement to try to curb the conflict. Then, on March 23rd, 2023, there was a meeting in Cairo, a minimal conference that took place where we did have a part of the international community present under the. This was an event that was organized by the United Nations, Saudi Arabia, the African Union, and IGAD, just to mention a few, supported with technical and financial partners. And here again, the misunderstanding or the lack of inclusion of some actors resulted in the fact that it was not productive whatsoever. Compounded to that, it's also important to have the necessary resources to understand what the humanitarian emergencies are, and Africa in this case. Well, if the estimate of the United Nations is $2.7 billion, it's important to note that in March, for instance, March 2024, 40% of this amount, equivalent to $108 million, were mobilized, which means that there's upwards of $2 billion gap that needs to be sourced elsewhere.
Now, Ms. Boogert.
Thank
It's
you.
your turn.
Thank you for inviting me, first of all. And I'm here not as a diplomat or as an academic, but as a practitioner. And the question was how to enhance the role, or what the role of civil society is to enhance peace building. But I think it's also important to look at the why. Why is it important? So yesterday someone mentioned, of the esteemed guest, that a negotiation process is a process. It's not linear. It's not being done in one day. And suddenly, if you're in the process, you might feel that you're going somewhere as negotiating parties, as a mediator. And you're very close to an agreement, but suddenly this process is derailed. And what actually caused the derail of the process? That is also because you're not dealing only with the parties at the table, but you're dealing with a whole spectrum of people behind it, constituencies, spoilers, if you can call them, different factors, people, actors in society that have a role. And if you don't put them all in the table, in the spectrum, I always see it as you have the table at the track one level, but there are different tables, negotiation tables in the country. And they're key players, key figures that are trusted by others, that are playing a huge role in brokering peace on the ground to see what is necessary to build trust. And I think these people should be brought into a peace process. So these attempts should be linked to broker peace. And these are civil society actors, church leaders, mosque leaders, women groups, as we mentioned, youth organizations, and not to forget business leaders. And I think there should be strategic thinking about how to use this knowledge actually in the ground, also in the formal peace process that is designed, because they not only bring out-of-the-box solutions, but they also bring about broadly felt solutions that are more sustainable and that's felt on the ground as, yes, we are thought of as well. And I learned as experience as a mediator on all kinds of levels that the most important thing is what people want is to be listened to be seen, to their voices to be heard, what happened to them. And I sometimes see it as an upside triangle, that first people need to tell and their voices need to be heard before you can go to the wishes and what they felt, to be vulnerable and tell what really occurred, before you can go to a solution. Because when an agreement has been reached, most parties and the mediation team and all these around are very thrilled. Yes, we have a conclusion. Yes, we made a deal. But actually the hard work starts at that point about implementing these peace agreements and make it sustainable. And it should be also planned within the negotiation process for that implementation. And you need then also these people on the ground. And I have a very good example of when I was in 2015, I was in South Sudan, invited by the UNDP.
Thank you, Ms. Boogert. Thank you so much.
Almost.
It's 5
ready.
minutes.
Okay.
5 minutes, yeah. You have always 1 minute advance. So now I think Mr. Jeghllaly, yes, please. Yeah.
Okay. Bon, nous avons un médiateur.
We have a very tough mediator, so I'm going to go straight to the point. These will be telegraphic messages. So all the panelists since yesterday have been mentioning the conflict, this multi-level conflict in Africa. This means that there are different levels of mediation. We need several mediators with different roles and hats. I mean, some that have more of an official capacity that represent the UN or regional organization, but we also need mediators from civil society, because in some contexts there are bottlenecks. A mediator that represents the UN or the African Union or states cannot. I mean, they have political reserves, sometimes legal reserves, of getting involved in many conflicts. It's important to have a certain that complementarity, sometimes a complete substitution. Just recently in Tunisia in 2013, 2014, when the political crisis broke out in Tunisia, no state wanted to embark in any negotiation. Even Switzerland refused, and this is why it's important to have that quartet. The ILO, the Human Rights Organization, UTECA, the Union of Tunisian Entrepreneurs. I'm trying to recall the rest, and the charities, professional organizations, associations. Well, they managed to successfully implement this process, because in the Tunisian configuration, no mediation, be it from the UN or government, or mediation from the Arab League or the African Union, whatnot, were able to make any progress. So maybe on a more broader context, for instance, when the war broke out between Russia and Ukraine, Russia, for instance, is accepting no mediation in this war. There was one play or one leverage. I mean, there was wheat, and so if you recall how expensive wheat cost. And I work for a small organization in Russia, based in Switzerland, and we spoke to the very lowly mediator, quote unquote, and small scale mediator that managed to adopt an agreement, to reach an agreement, but this illustrates that even as part of an international conflict or an internal conflict, it's important to involve civil society as a co-mediator, and sometimes as a official or full-fledged mediator altogether. We also need to involve civil society in mediation for a very practical example. It's true that civil society in mediation involving a civil society can fail, and it's okay. But if IGAD or the UN or the African Union fails, well, that becomes problematic. It heightens the conflict. It amplifies the conflict, and all doors shut down. And the role of civil society can also to try and learn, to brainstorm ideas, and to test solutions. And then the UN or other states can take on and officialize the work that was embarked on, the mediation work that was started out by civil society, or that which civil society was involved in. As a mediator on the ground, what I can tell you is that we have 3 phases. We have the armed conflict, where we aim for a ceasefire. The second phase, we try to negotiate a political settlement. And the third phase is the consolidation of an agreement, or the peace consolidation. At first, African civil society, be it local or international, well, we're up for grabs. Everyone's trying to reach out to us, because these are burning issues. And for instance, the situation in Libya, the ceasefire announced in 2020. The ceasefire that was announced in 2020 was negotiated by civil society. If we talk about humanitarian corridors or the supply of humanitarian aid or medical supplies, well, generally it's civil society that manages to negotiate this. But when the situation changes, where there's a political agreement or a political settlement, where there's sharing powers and resources, no, stay out. So that's not your business, and that's no longer your business. And this is something that we'll handle with the key hard actors on the ground. You, civil society, well, we'll call you later on at the third phase, which means for the peace consolidation, and come to change the mindsets and engage in conflict transformation, etc. So there's a sort of selection of inclusion or exclusion of civil society. And this is not only done by the conflict actors, but this is also done by the mediators sometimes, even at the other part of the UN. So there's definitely a space. There's definitely space for civil society. This is not intentional. Thank you.
It seems that there is a sort of consensus that there is an important role that is played by civil society organizations, and then the active involvement or participation of these civil society organizations or civil society groups in ceasefire negotiations enhances, strengthens peace agreements, especially the sustainability of peace agreements, and of course, the overall peace-building process. So if that is the case, then my next question, specific question, will go to Mr. Ahamed. So look at Africa as a continent. Is there any enabling environment that is created for these African civil society organizations or groups, to advocate their inclusion in the formal ceasefire negotiation process? It can be at continental level, sub-regional level.
Oui, bien sûr.
Yes, absolutely. So it's important to note that first and foremost, all parties involved in the ceasefire agreement consider this ceasefire agreement as the ultimate moment where positions will be shared, the roles will be allocated. If you recall, for those of you that followed up on the Swan City agreement in South Africa, the Swan City agreement had broken down the different positions in government, but also the public state-owned enterprises, but all the available resources. So those that fought consider this ceasefire, negotiation as a sort of enshrinement of the reason why this fight was, all this struggle took place. And this is why this moment is considered as a sort of premium for violence. The more violent we were, well, the greater, the harder we're going to tap on, strike the table. So it is also possible to find spaces, and the African Union, in fact, made the step forward with the resolution 1325. There are mechanisms within the African Union that do give a possibility for civil society organizations in Africa to be involved. And so what we need is to collectively, think tanks, states, and civil regional organizations and continental organizations, we need to continue making the effort to giving room to these civil society organizations. Why is it so important for them to be involved? This gives legitimacy, inclusion, and gives a sense of ownership for the agreement. And so we should absolutely not exclude civil society. We need to find a way to make them part and parcel of the process, to avoid, for instance, the inter-Chadian dialogue that took place in Doha. So when we came back to N'Djamena, there was nobody there, no civil society, no Qataris, no international community, so the agreement was never implemented. And so if we had truly involved civil society, well, maybe they would have taken on the next step, and they would have handled the transition. And I will stop there before he cuts me off.
So my next question will be to Mr. Oumar Ba. So basically, would like to hear from you one practical, innovative approach that is used by one or more of African civil society organizations that can foster, the ceasefire negotiation. Thank you.
Merci bien, me vient à l'esprit le cas.
Thank you very much. So what comes to mind is the example of the Central African Republic. We have two bodies that are led by two eminent women, the Peace Academy, that is led by Madame Montaigne, and the Women's Leadership Network from Central Africa, which also has played an instrumental role with so many other civil society organizations at the local and the national level. And these bodies played a key role in the process of what we call the Bangui dialogues. And so this is the Bangui platform where civil society expressed itself and played its legitimate role to help the political leaders to implement the political agreement for peace and the reconciliation in the Central African Republic and took place in Khartoum. And so this was in February 2019, but the negotiation, the very last minute, took place between January 24th and February 5th, 2019, and I very much recall that it was definitely no easy task, and civil society was able to give very creative and innovative ideas to impose itself and help push all this forward. Now, in Sudan, let me conclude by Central Africa. There was the platform of religious faiths, which brings together all the religious faiths and the late Imam Pierre Soumam, who were one of the pillars of the national reconciliation process. Secondly, in Sudan, you have the initiative for the that was launched by General in Senegal, and here we are leaving two African countries, and we tried to find an Islamic scholar, and so where there's this traditional legitimacy, and that brought together 50 armed groups to have them silence the arms, weapons where other international organizations had failed in pulling this off. And so this was commended by the international community, by the United Nations, the African Union, and others. And I will leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now...
Thank you very much. Et maintenant...
Miss or Mistress?
Thank you.
So my question to you is, about challenges what challenges are faced by these African civil society groups or organizations to ensure their inclusion in the formal process of ceasefire negotiations? And then what do you think are the possible, maybe, recommendations to tackle these challenges?
Yeah, so there are many challenges, and if you want to involve civil society, then how do you want to bring them to the table all? That makes it very complex, so you have to find other ways, and I think some of them are mentioned already, to bring in their voices at the table through dialogue advisory groups, for example, or peace polls. I know from Northern Ireland, people brought in the academics thought about peace polls, that people from on the ground could say what is important for their future, how would they see the future, and they brought it to the table. So you have to find other means. What also was mentioned just now, there's a big importance to train or to support insider mediators. The UNDP calls them insider mediators, but they're key members of society who already from their hearts go in about society, broker, but do they have the skills and do they really know what mediation is? Because you're faced with a lot of unknowns, sometimes all threatening your position, who you are. It's scary, and if you're not trained as a mediator, that is challenging. I think also there should be more support and more money financially. Recognition about networks. Yesterday the Women Network of Mediators was mentioned, but there are many of them. And usually people say, yeah, is it worth it to spend money on it? But the networks, what it does, maybe it provides training, they are supported, you can bring people from across the country together. For example, I worked in Libya with UN Women, and there in COVID time, suddenly trainings were not going through, but then they thought about, let's do this online. It's the technology advantage that we have now, and what it delivered is that more people from also the remote areas were just taking part. And so other viewpoints were at the table. So not only the elite or those who live in the big cities were able to go to these venues, but also those who are living far away. So see how you can involve them and also support them talking about issues. What I also saw is what I wanted to mention before in 2015 in South Sudan. We had this peace agreement in August, and then when I came in later on in September, October, I was working with religious leaders from all kinds of levels, different parts of the country, and we looked at the peace agreement and they said, I don't even know what's in there. Where can I find it? And so find access, so bring it to those who need to work with it. And in chapter 5, there was a chapter on reconciliation and healing, and they were also in there. Those leaders should be playing a role. And they said, but we're not engaged. We don't know about this. Wow. So it's also about educating people, drawing their attention, drawing them in. It's difficult, but I think there has been a lot of examples that it worked, from previous peace processes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And now, Mr. Jeghllaly, building up on the challenges that have been mentioned, and if these civil society organizations are going to, to influence, to be included in the overall process, in what way can these civil society organizations or groups can engage, the formal institutions that are responsible for the formal ceasefire negotiation processes? It can be, it's good if I mentioned, say, the African Union, because it has a framework. Yesterday, someone from ISS was mentioning about APSA, African Peace and Security Architecture, in which this overall continental framework, especially including the participation of these civil society organizations is also addressed. So focus on the formal institutions. It can be ECOWAS, or regional economic communities, or AU, or any other arrangement. So in what way these groups or civil society organizations engage these institutions? Yeah.
Rapidement, d'ailleurs, dans l'esprit de la question,
In the very spirit of the question, there is that very question of how this civil society organization is looking to be recognized as a mediator. It is up to it to do the endeavor to touch base with the formal institution, to be part of such mediators. Well, sometimes it is the other way around that should be the case. It is the civil society which is sought after or even courted to be part of such mediators. Because in the conflicts, generally, mostly internal conflicts, all of the stakeholders are weakened legitimacy-wise. Either there are governors and they know their power is being challenged, or they are opposing or opposition groups and they are looking for legitimacy. Mostly in the armed conflicts, we have to justify the use of force and might. When we start negotiating, we're looking for a solution, and we try to associate and involve the civil society to adopt a narrative for the cause or the very war, and for objectives that are very meeting with the national interest and which also are in keeping with specific claims. It could be this or that. In other words, in the very spirit and mind of the question, one has to acknowledge and recognize that civil society organization must be sought after. It's not it to ask for recognition. Example in case is Sudan. At the beginning of the political crisis in 2019, there was civil and political society versus the military. But the political configuration has changed, mostly starting from 2022, whereby it was the military between themselves, the RSF with the Sudanese army. Everyone was, of course, at that time trying to court. And to date, with the Al-Qawa, Al-Hurriya wa Taghyir, the forces of freedom and change, they have so much so, of course, tried to date with civil society organization and to really court it, to so much so that they have divided in 2 or 3 or 4. So this is important. Why am I insisting on this? Because civil society organization must be aware of the fact that it comes with added value, which added value must be put on the table, and this is a trump card to be negotiated with and upon in its work as a mediator, but also as a trump card for negotiation when it comes to agree on a new political configuration or chessboard. What I do recommend to all civil society organizations of Africa are the following points, specific bullets. First, clarify roles. In other words, are CSOs here acting as mediators with all of the impartiality requirements that are required, or are they soft, quote-unquote, or de facto representatives of some political actors? Because in conflicts, some parties, mostly the governments, do refuse to officially recognize their political opponents or military adversaries. They're looking for a dialogue, and hence they should represent them under civil society organizations' labels, which is not a problem. This could be an entry point, an adequate entry point to. So this allows it to avoid confusion, which confusion can also be caused by mediators, the likes of UN. When the UN invites the African Union to a very wide dialogue, at the beginning, civil society organization was considered to be an insider mediator, but we also inflict upon them the status of political parties, which role needs, if not gains, to be clarified. Second thing, we need to be specialized. We cannot be a mediator and have another role. By way of example, This is the civil society organization of human rights. It is a good thing. It is laudable. One must do it. But in the morning, you cannot issue a release or write a criminal communique against the war criminals, and at the end of the day, same day, you deal with these. So, because this is a breakage of the confidence and trust chain. So, sometimes these are good-intentioned, well-intentioned, and bona fides actors, but this is not perceived that way. But it is almost politically incorrect for those persons, of course, who have good will, forget that you are human rights activists. We're now negotiating. We're saving the future. Whatever happened in the past, we have the time to save. But for the future, to stop hostilities and to stop to allow. Yes. Merci.
Thank you for observing the rule of the game. And then now, I think we have 30 minutes for the audience. And the same rule, by the way, applies to the audience as well. So make it brief, extremely brief. And then you have to mention, maybe the speakers who should be addressing your questions. So maybe for the first round, we can take 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, 6. Okay, go ahead, please. Number 1. Who is number 1? Yes. Yeah, now you can speak as you wish, but make sure that we have also.
Hello, my name is Oumar Ba. I'm a student from Al Akhawain University, and my question to all of you would be, what specific lessons can African civil society organizations draw from successful ceasefire experiences, such as the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland, or the peace agreement between the FARC and Colombia, and to inform and maybe inspire efforts to enforce peace and security within the continent? Thank you.
Thank you. Number 2? Yes.
Hello, everyone. My name is Fatma Tajabi. I have a question maybe for Judith or Mohamed, or anyone can answer. It's as a mediator, what are some of the strategies and mechanisms that you put in place to make sure that the civil societies are not only included into the discussions, but their recommendations and concerns are also put into the final decisions? Thank you.
Thank you. Number 3, yes.
Merci.
Al-Qadari International Strategy Analyst. Philippe Hugon has talked about Africa in plural, Africa of riches, wealth, and natural resources, but also a crisis Africa. I think the region of the Sahel embodies such descriptions because this is the richest region in Africa in terms of raw materials, but also the region where are found the majority of foreign military bases. So one can say, therefore, this territory is a battlefield between the superpowers since the arrival of Russia in 2011 in Africa. But there's also the arrival of youth, a new generation which is making it to Africa. Of course, we've seen that. These are youth who have waved the Russian flags. These are young, muscular young persons who have undertaken putsch and coups. These are drug traffickers who recruited by the jihadists. So if we rewind back in time, these are the youth who have led the Arab Spring, who have taken it to the street in Paris for climate change. There's a new generation. And Mr. Ahamed, you've also talked about the Resolution 13 pertaining to women to go against the devil, quote unquote. So my question, what is the SOS? What are what is the civil society doing, of course, to overcome the situation, mostly with the demographic potential. Sorry. Yeah, thank you. We.
I mean, the chance as well. Yeah. Number 5. Oh, yes, 4. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yasmin Hasnawi, Professor of Political Science, American University, Kuwait. Now, with the rise of armed conflicts and Islamist insurgencies, we see the role of CSOs that actually they have an easier access to different parts of the conflict, namely ethnic groups, private security companies, international military organizations, etc. My question is to Mrs. Boogert, is what measures, in your view, are necessary for the civil society to be able to genuinely prevent the conflicts rather than with the long term, to prevent the conflicts with the long term rather than actually reacting to the latest crisis of the day? My second question goes to Mr. Jeghllaly, is you have an experience, sir, at the UN. I just want to have your input regarding the formal area meetings that is put by the Security Council, those meetings where civil society is convened. They are convened to come and take part of the mediation. How efficient that is, because so far we come to see some of the recommendations of the civil society that is not part of the resolutions of the UN Security Council. So how do you think, I want to know about the efficiency of those meetings convened by the Security Council. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Number 6. Yes. Yeah. It's 5. Yeah, 5, yes.
Merci, Monsieur.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Mine is not really a question per se, but I can give the opportunity to our friend Mohamed to really complete and bring the two recommendations together.
Okay, thank you. Number 6.
Numero.
Great. I see. Yes? Yeah, go ahead, please.
Bonjour.
Good morning, good afternoon. I have a whole slew of questions, but I'll be very brief. The first question, how do you think that the civil society organization for the conflict settlement in Africa, could it be better related to the agendas of development and promotion of peace? Second question is, the contribution of civil society organization, is it limited to the formal peace process or also to the informal peace process? And this is addressed to Mrs. Judith and Mr. Mohamed. Thank you. Merci.
Yeah, maybe good if Mr. Jeghllaly. Yeah. Am I right? Yeah, you can start. Yeah. Jeghllaly.
Mr. Jeghllaly. Let us start with the FARC. FARC is a very long-standing conflict, which this is, I think, a telling example that really is demanding a lot of mediation at a lot of levels. But the problem is that when the media, the Colombian media, or not mediation, sorry, when the mediation is led by a private mediation organization, it leads to what? We don't know. Everyone wants to jump on the bandwagon. The Americans want to go through the windows. The Swiss say, no, free some room for me. I'm the expert in international mediation. So there's a shift between between mediators. So we don't have yet a solution to that. But several peace processes have been disrupted, perturbated by the mediation, by this supply of mediation. The Sudanese, so that's a good example of having too much mediation kills mediation. So how can civil society organization contribute to imposing or themselves or participate actively to the outcomes of peace process? I think there are two things to be accounted for here. Civil society organization's voice is not being heard, if and when they defend specific interests. The civil society organizations must participate and must come to peace dialogue with a very wide representation. The rationale that I hear to exclude civil society is often, no, we can't really include them because they don't have a phone number. We cannot call someone and, well, we need you. They are really too much divided. Civil society organization must be better organized, not necessarily as part of a Stalinian-like or pyramidal organization, but there must be a balanced representation. The example of Tunisia, where we had 4 organizations, I'm talking about Libya. Well, this is something that we often do when there is a problem, where there is a conflict somewhere. We try to train a delegation who would be going to a tribe or armed groups to release the prisoners or solve a problem. But in the representation of this organization, 7, 8, 10 persons, we try and select and cherry pick from each tribe some persons who have no bad experience behind them left. We impose a narrative. We insist on a brand image. We're saying we do not come to talk to you on behalf of a specific group, but rather on the overwhelming majority of Libyans. And if you turn down our good offices, well, you would be refusing that to the Libyans. See, and the mediator is not someone who does not negotiate. He does have negotiation. There are means of pressure, and civil society does have that brand image whereby that it should always discharge of. In 2020, there was the Political Dialogue Forum in Libya, attended by 75 persons who represented the political military parties, women who have partaken in the works of that dialogue. On the very first day, these women have gone into a separate room, and women have agreed on a release where they have demanded quota, etc. And that was the very first day. Once the ensuing negotiations were under the moral pressures whereby the women have agreed, we cannot do something else but that. And the points and requests made by women were adopted as such after the 6th or the 7th day of this dialogue. You see, there are several means, not to say stratagems, that the civil society can opt in for and use. I don't know what I can add and say the following. In the Libyan context, I think that the best mediators, the persons with whom I have treated, are the traffickers of all goods, of all walks of goods, because traffickers are not looking for conflicts. They are trying to ensure, to create stabilities of their transported goods. Even in total insecurity in Libya, it was the traffickers who were able to really allow the movement of both people and goods, sometimes on 1,500 kilometers, and they were a mana of help, because we demonize them often. Well, let's unlabel. Let's remove all the labels. They can prove to be very useful, and they can play a very important role, mostly when it comes to local conflicts. So this is what I want to say.
Maybe, yes. Welcome. Briefly.
So there was a question about the Good
So that we can have second round of questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a question about the Good Friday agreements and lessons and limitations there. And I know Monica McWilliams. I don't know if you familiar with her name, but she was one of the women leaders who thought, these parties at the table, they don't get very far, and there's more of an negotiation going on than a negotiation. And then she organized herself with women from different parts of society to try to form a political party. And they got enough votes and got themselves at the table. And what they did was to create an atmosphere of more trust, political cooperation prior and during the negotiations, but also to collect all things that people wanted to incorporate in the peace talks at dialogue conferences, different ways of collecting voices, and they got it on the table. So, and I remember talking to her that she said, I was shunned, I was a woman, and they were saying bad names about me, but I persisted because I needed to be. So it's not always easy. So these are also stories that should be told, I think. So what it means that it's hard sometimes as civil society organizations or women groups or those who want to make change, but persist and find partners, find alliances and see if you can go around and make your voice heard. Then there was this question about strategies for the mediator, NGOs for the long run. I think when you're also humanitarians, and they are also in part of this civil society group sometimes, and it's quite hard because you're always there, and sometimes you think I have to have a result quickly. But actually the long-term relationships, and we had a conversation about that just before, the long-term relationships, knowing each other, not always dealing with each other, these are the most valuable in negotiation processes, because when the moment is there and the trust is somewhere created beforehand, maybe you are the partner to talk to. So invest in this relationship. I remember in the South African peace process, I worked a couple of times with Rolf Meijer, who was the chief negotiator, and he said there was a lot of civil society leaders, so religious leaders, all that, they made it possible to have secret talks. And so he said, I had breakfasts a couple of times a week, very early, with Mr. Mandela, because he started very early at 5 o'clock or something, but that made that the building of trust, the building of respect, although the differences and maybe disgust that you have is formed. And when you're at the table and it becomes hard, then you know how to find each other. So relationship building, trust building is also part of civil society, I think. And I have another example why also women groups play a good role. In Libya, for example, women in society, also in the remote areas, when there's a peace agreement and, for example, IDPs come back and they try to go to their homes, but other people are living there. This is an example, but there are many. How to then be in between. And I think there should be more focus also on trauma-informed practices. So how to deal with trauma, how to not be traumatized or affected by your experience as well, how to calm your nervous system, because we need that more and more everywhere in the world, I think. And that's also maybe something that civil society can take up.
Thank you.
I leave it now.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Okay. Mr. Oumar Ba.
Merci. Je voudrais d'abord réagir sur 3 éléments très rapidement. Le premier, c'est de dire que la société civile, lorsqu'elle intervient dans les processus de cessez-le-feu,
civil society, when it intervenes in the ceasefire process, is part of the subset of society as a whole that is impacted by crimes and violations of rights and human rights, etc., and daily survival. So consequently, by strategic rationality and instinct of staying alive, they are part and parcel, and they have to be prioritized and they have to be involved. So when we look at the continental strategy of peace and stabilization for Africa, there are two things that we have to bear in mind, even if sometimes it's not successful systematically. You have got ECOSOC, which is the Economic, Social and Cultural Council of the African Union, and the practical guide of interaction between civil society of the continent and the Pan-African panorama. Why am I quoting both these institutions? There's the executive, continental, and the parliament, which is also an active instance, even if the efficiency is sometimes problematic under a legal and factual standpoint. But what we have to bear in mind is that civil society alone can do nothing if the protagonists do not have a consciousness of their leadership for social transformation. They stay in a mindset of predation and of leadership or transaction. This is the first observation. Then the second observation is that one cannot consider it could be efficient and really delivering its promises of education, etc., or other social advantages if it's sclerotic itself and if it's itself already corrupt. So it must be more ethical, and if the players are ethical and of good faith, that will be a big difference, because otherwise we always will fall in the pit of failure. I will give you an example. When there was a coup in Niger, a person tried to come and negotiate, but he failed because the players were camping on their initial positions. And the second thing is that when there was a crisis between Senegal and Mauritania, it was largely solved by the involvement of the African Union, Arab League, the ECI, France, and other players, but it was also supported by the religious dignitaries and the border people of both countries. And just as an illustration, we have to understand that the consistency between formal and informal dynamics for crisis resolution is a must. And the economic and security crisis also should not be left aside, because we understand that the tech paradigm tells us that the higher the frustration effect in a country, the higher the mutations and dynamics towards a clash or coup or a rebellion of terrorists may be exacerbated. If you add to that the porosity of borders, fragility of the states, if you take the 5 key criteria enabling to say what are the frailties, the weak points of the states, we will understand that most of our countries lay on untidy ground. So we have to understand that in a relevant manner, the civilian society in Africa, in its large diversity and specificities, whether organic or institutional, have to rethink their model, and they must insist on the internal acquis, but not reject any external technical and financial partners fundamentally, including France, the United States, etc. I believe that these are classic partners whom, if we disagree on some points with them, we have to still be able to discuss around the same table with a constructive overcoming of a crisis mindset. And I have to understand also that we should not be condescending. And when I agree with other colleagues that African youth is not made up of drugs, of jihadism, etc., it's an archaic scheme that is not based on reality. Of course, there's a marginal part of African youth that is enrolled into that, but enrolled young people is a reflection of the youth, is a mistake of the youth. They have to be able to overcome challenges and to make efforts, and the structural paradigm of Africa, of the essence of our states, is totally discrepant in a fundamental manner, because we have this deficit economies, so the productivity of the growth is exogenous, very simply. This is why you can change once of government, of President of the Republic, you can make political, democratic, or other transitions observed by international communities, greeted, but you shall not see any growth, whereas growth is really the key word and the key element for any prosperous society. Thank you very much for your thoughts, Mr. Ahamed. Now, yes, there was a question about the mediator being able to do something to involve civil society and make it possible that recommendations of the civil society be implemented in the agreement. We have to understand that mediators are there to help people talk to each other, so they should not self-impose. They can advise, recommend, show to the parties what is their interest, namely to listen to diverging voices. In the case of Chad, Saïd Abass is saying now, sorry, some technicalities. Issues, some things must be said. There's been no negotiations. The Qataris gave a paper. They said sign, and you sign. And once everybody has signed, people gave a big round of applause, and people went back to N'Djamena. And in N'Djamena, there was no civil society. There was nobody there. There was no agreement. And we are going each time towards these kinds of discussions instead of, preparing the way for the Lord and do things fairly. We are self-imposed things and the conflict starts again. So I think this is something very important. That's the recommendation I wanted to make beforehand. The policy center, in the like of what Morocco did with the imams in the years 2010 and such, retraining imams, equipping them, offering them an alternative vision of the Quran in order to offer some religious more peaceful mindset. They trained mediators. They should train also people of the social civil society for them to be better equipped and to bring an enlightened voice, showing the authorities, showing to others that it is in our common interest to integrate these people within the different discussions.
We have 6 minutes, so maybe let's take 2 questions, 2 more questions. Yes, 1, 2. Okay.
Hello, Brian Posthumous, journalist. A quick question. So far we've discussed the participation of civil society in mediation processes under the pretense or under the illusion sometimes that civil society actually exists. There are quite a number of places where it doesn't exist because it's either been banned or has been prosecuted or has gone underground. How can you deal with mediation in such situations and still engage civil society?
Thank you. Yes, Madam?
Bonjour.
Fadwa Mary, I'm a doctor in international relationships. Good day. My question is directed to all panelists that I'd like to thank, by the way, as well as organizers for this event. I heard many people talk about the concrete role of civil society in negotiations and in the mediation process, in the conflict resolution process. So I'd like to get your feedback with regard to the relationship that they build with the population, the very civil society whom by nature has a deep relationship with political institutions and with the population at the same time. Is it a trustworthy relationship, or is it something that is biased?
Yeah, thank you so much. So who wants to respond to the 2 questions? Huh? Yes. And just in 1 minute.
Yes.
One.
Yes.
Okay.
Inch'Allah. Oui, donc je vais peut-être répondre.
So I am going to try to give an answer to both questions quite briefly. When you talk about civil society it depends on the cases. I was in a country of Central Africa, which I will not quote, and I remember that it was an international institution. They did not observe elections for such and such diplomatic reasons or out of convenience, but they still funded two platforms of civil society, two coalitions, and after crisscrossing what happened, we realized that one is closer to power in place and the other one the opposition, so we could have both schemes in the case of a crisis. Secondly, and I'm going to try to respond to the other question, if you look at what's going on in the current crisis, if you look at RDC, the Democratic Republic of Congo and other countries, you will see that there are more than 12 million people displaced and more than 35.6 million of people who are now expecting emergency humanitarian aid. So what does it mean? There is more humanitarian emergency that should be self-imposed, and this reality should take us to depassionate these crises and to go beyond and to impose ceasefire, because without ceasefire there's no humanitarian aid that can reach anyone. Yes, the relationship between the civil society, political players is building in the same vein as what the journalist just said. There is not one civil society. There are lots of players within civil societies. And we should not quote any countries there, but powers also create their own civil societies. We should not be mistaken. We have to keep a close eye on that. People are known and well known. I spent 2 years in Casamance to try and open dialogues between the democratic forces of Casamance and the power in Dakar, in Senegal. So there are ladies who've been there for very many years. They've been working and they've been involved for a long time, but there are other ladies bringing food to the rebels at night. They pretend to be part of the civil society. So it's a very lengthy work of drawing the line between good and evil. And as a mediator, I can't say, oh, you can come in, you can't. I think it's up to the government to invite people to negotiate around the same table. We should not be naive. And it's been clearly said, if there's no civil society in the Doha dialogue about Chad, it's because the government appointed its own parties. And there was a recent dialogue in Libreville, Gabon. The government said to everyone, give me 4 people. They were given 4 people, and the more virulent, the more exacerbated were discarded, and the more quiet were invited to the dialogue. So that's how people work and try to find answers to this.
So maybe we have around 30 seconds. Can you do it within 15, 20?
On a plusieurs sociétés civiles, donc.
There are several kinds of civil societies. Of course, that's why I mentioned traffickers, because in some context, it's also part of the civil society, and as well as, you know, shops, and sometimes they have a card to play, and they have to do it in a very wise and strategic, pragmatic way with the hardcore players that are equipped with weapons, etc. So the only thing that raises an issue, mostly in Africa, is that whenever this civil society tries to play the role of a mediator, up to some point they are accused of being a bit too connected to international players, working for the sake of the West, etc. So you have to be a good player, you have to be strategically wise, and try and make sure you're not going to put everybody in a position of being accused.
Sake of fairness, maybe.
So keep it short.
Yes, briefly.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think, especially in civil society, when you're one of the civil society organizations, it's because of your actions that you show that you're impartial. Even when you're part of one of the parties of the conflict, many insider mediators do or are. Be there for everyone. So explain the rules, explain what they can expect from you, explain what mediation entails, and that you're not a negotiator, you're not on each side, so you can play that part. And then, it's up to them to trust you and to help you, let you guide them through the process. But that's always a choice of the people and not of the mediator. So you can just show that you're willing to help. But if the trust is not there, it's up to someone else. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think we have to stop here. I would like to thank the speakers for sharing their experiences and, of course, their expertise. And then I would like also to thank the audience. So thank you so much. I think we are done.